Hello, everybody, and welcome to Empire Soccer Report. I finally found a name for this new venture. I'm James Burley, proud to be joined by Luca Richman of RBNY Experience. This is Empire Soccer Report. It's going to be a regular podcast covering soccer in the New York area, particularly Red Bull New York, and hopefully in the next day or two, an online publication to join it. I'm James Burley. I've been covering the New York Red Bulls, now Red Bull New York, I guess, for the past 4 seasons with WFV Sports and Fordham University. And now this is kind of the new avenue for doing things, and I'm proud to be joined by our first guest ever, Luca Richman of RBNY Experience. If you follow the New York Red Bulls, you probably have seen his stuff on Instagram and Twitter. Luca, thank you so much for joining, man. How are you?
Good, James. Yeah, no, appreciate being the first guest on this new venture. Very excited for the podcast and the site and all of it. And yeah, James has been covering the Red Bulls with Fordham and a few other things, but very excited to see this new era for coverage. So, but yeah, no, I'm doing well. Just enjoying the purgatory between Christmas and New Year's, like the very nice, chill, relaxing week where you don't know what day it is, you don't know what day of the week, you don't know you know, the actual date, but definitely nice to just reset a bit. And especially in the off season, it's felt pretty active the past few weeks for the Red Bulls. So we'll get into it, but like to see that proactivity, and we'll see what the new year brings for the club.
Certainly a more active offseason for the Red Bulls than we've been accustomed to in the past, that's for sure. Players coming in, players going. We're going to get through all of that. Hopefully, we have a whole full season of successful things to talk about on this show and to write about on Empire Soccer Report. Hope to have players and coach interviews as well. Many good things to come in 2026. But a happy holidays and a happy new year to everybody listening and watching as we get started. Let's jump right into the offseason. Like you mentioned, Luca, there's only so much time to be posting old photos when you were balling out at RDS training back in the day. If you haven't seen those, I'll put those up on the video right now for those listening. Go check out the YouTube to get some good photos of Luca as a baller back in the day. But the offseason for the Red Bulls, I mean, pretty tumultuous. I mean, we began late in the season that we knew that Jochen Schneider would not be coming back, and Julian de Guzman would be stepping up to the head of sport role. And with that came the firing of Sandro Schwartz, eventually the new manager in Michael Bradley, and now players coming in and moving. And I don't think we've seen the end of it, Luca. Let's just go through the biggest departures. I mean, the core of the squad is being broken up as we speak. Lewis Morgan, Peter Stroud, Sean Nealis, Carlos Coronel, Kyle Duncan, all gone. None of them are coming back. In the case of Duncan, his contract option was declined. Carlos Coronel went to free agency, and then trades within the league for Lewis Morgan, Peter Stroud, and Sean Nealis, and potentially Daniel Edelman could be next. He's been rumored to be another player that could be on the move for the Red Bulls. Just a complete blowing up of the squad, and some emotional goodbyes here, Luca. Diehard fan in your own right for your entire life. Saying goodbye to a player like Lewis Morgan, saying goodbye to a player like Sean Nealis, who is so high in the all-time appearance list for this club, feels like it's the changing of a direction, and it's going to be Julian de Guzman and Michael Bradley at the wheel. Your first thoughts about these big changes?
Yeah, I ultimately think these departures are upsetting. Sean Nealis, Lewis Morgan, chief among them. But none of these guys made the playoffs in 2025, and I think that's something that I am reminding myself and that I would implore other Red Bulls fans to remind themselves of, is just that we complained all last season about the performances on the field. Obviously, this team went to MLS Cup the year before, but ultimately in 2025, they did not get the job done with a 10th place finish in the East. And so, in my opinion, no player should really feel safe. And that's going to lead to some emotional goodbyes, as you said. Lewis Morgan, Sean Nealis, really tough to see those guys go. I think for those two guys, Lewis Morgan, I thought it was time to move on just based on the injury history. I think you really take a gamble if you keep him around for another year and really build the squad around him. He's very likely going to go and ball out at San Diego, which will be a bit disheartening to see if that does happen, but also would be so excited for him. And the Red Bulls would also get a lot more GAM based on the performance incentives in that trade. But I think if we're trotting out Lewis Morgan for another season, a lot of Red Bulls fans will also remember what turned into a meme of Jokin and all these people saying that Lewis Morgan is like a new signing. He's no longer like a new signing. He's off the roster, and so I think it's tough because we have beautiful memories of 2022 and 2024 and comeback player of the year and I think he's the eighth or ninth leading goal scorer in club history. Yeah, and so that is just it hurts to see that go, but ultimately I think it's okay. And Sean Neal is another one too. I think it was very interesting at the end of 2025, Tim Parker kind of played him out of a starting role. Still a massive part of the cup run in 2024, our 2023 captain, again, hundreds of appearances. But I think it's okay to cycle out a guy like that who I think was starting to dip a little bit in form, still very solid at the back. And then yeah, the other ones, Peter Stroud, Kyle Duncan. I like how proactive the front office is being at not just letting these guys run out their contracts, picking up their options so that they can trade them within the next month. I really appreciate that proactivity from De Guzman. I feel like it's a level of proactivity we haven't seen in recent years in terms of getting players out. There are still a few players that many fans and the two of us would probably want them to trade, and the offseason is still long, but ultimately my first reactions are very positive to get a lot of these players out, even if there are some emotional goodbyes.
Some emotional goodbyes. I think Lewis Morgan, I think fits right in my mind as sort of like a Daniel Royer figure within the club, just a player
Yeah.
that you could always count on to
Yeah.
provide something in the attack, and attractive football comes with that, right? Like Lewis Morgan, I think, scored some beautiful goals, and he scored loads of them whenever he was healthy. You know he's going to provide. I hope he finds success in San Diego with a team that already has a loaded attack. Like they could be really, really dangerous. They already were this past season, top of the Western Conference in MLS, and I think it's got an absolute weapon as well with Morgan joining. Peter Stroud is a homegrown player, from New Jersey, is the second Stroud family member to come through this club. So that's another painful one to go and say goodbye to. I feel like Peter Stroud, though, is part of the group of players that there's multiple players like him within this team. I think you have obviously the most glaringly obvious one is the other homegrown midfielder in Daniel Edelman. Both of them kind of provide a similar approach to the game. Stroud maybe gives you a little bit more in the attacking side, and Edelman a bit of a better defender, but again, kind of filling out the same roster role, at least on paper. And then Sean Nealis. You mentioned not Peter Stroud, Tim Parker. Under Sandro Schwartz, kind of earned the favor of that starting job next to Noah Ayla in center defense over Sean Nealis. And, for a guy who's, I believe, second all-time appearances for defenders in the club history and within the top 10 across all appearances, was the only New York-born and bred player to be captain of this club. To move on from him, that's a tough one as well. It's an emotional one of two players to ever score an MLS Cup for this club, the other being John Wolyniec. It's a difficult one, especially to a big rival in DC United. But for a player that is being paid that type of money to be a defender off the bench, just feels like if you want to step forward as a club and improve your roster, that's just not a type of player that you can keep contracted. And that's why I'd say the same thing about a guy like Kyle Duncan, who I think showed so much promise before leaving for Ostende in Belgium back in 2021. I think at that time he was among the best fullbacks in Major League Soccer, right or left, young or old. He was one of the best. And he came back and didn't quite match that form. I think that moment in his career was a big turning point for him. And he never really, jumped on the page as someone who could be more than just an average MLS fullback. He had his moments, certainly. I think back to the game against Minnesota this year. He was excellent against one of the best defensive teams in the league, providing assists for Choupo-Moting in a game where they were able to claw out a draw against a good Minnesota side. Kyle Duncan showed his quality, and I'm sure he'll find a job in Major League Soccer where he's going to be trusted week in, week out to provide those types of performances. But for a TAM player, Luca, I felt like Kyle Duncan, it was time to move on. And then Carlos Coronel, a player who has been among the best goalkeepers in MLS. His contract was up. It has been known for some time that he was eyeing a move overseas, had interest in Austria around 2023 and 2024. That didn't materialize. It looked for a moment like he was going to join Orlando City, but I think a lot of Red Bulls fans are excited to see that that's fallen through. He
Yeah.
gave them the Elias Manuel treatment, so to speak, who also turned down a move to Real Salt Lake after being traded at the end of last year. Coronel looked like he was going to finalize terms with Orlando City, and instead, the move's kind of been hijacked by Sao Paulo FC. It would bring Coronel back to his country of birth in Brazil. Of course, he's an international for Paraguay, looking to not only make the squad for the 2026 World Cup, where they will be facing against the U.S. in Group D, but he has a real shot at the starting job. I think he's lost that job in the qualifying cycle for 2026, and would be an uphill battle. But should he go to a big Brazilian giant like Sao Paulo and start and do well ahead of the World Cup, maybe he gets another look for the starting job. So I'm very excited for that move for him, and I know Red Bulls fans are excited that he will not be in the Eastern Conference of MLS moving forward.
Yeah, I think Carlos, it's a perfect time in his career to try something new and to push for a bigger club in a World Cup year. And part of me sneakily thinks that will be okay. I don't think this is as calamitous as maybe some other fans do. We'll get into the goalkeeping roster too, because that's an interesting position to talk about in the offseason. But yeah, I think the departure of Carlos is something that in a way felt a little premature because there wasn't he didn't really go out with a bang or didn't really go out terribly in my opinion, just kind of an average end to his tenure. Unfortunately it ended without a playoff appearance. But yeah, his run to MLS Cup in 2024 was really when I fell in love with him, and I think he just delivered so many memorable moments. But the goalkeeping position will ultimately be okay, I think, especially when we look down the list at the younger homegrown keepers coming up from Red Bulls too. I think the position is in somewhat safe hands, pun intended. If Aiden Stokes and Tobias Shevchik and all those guys kind of rise up in the next few years.
Long list at goalkeeper now that there's a number of names that could take up the starting role within this season or in the coming seasons, and we'll get to that. As for players that are coming in, the two biggest signings have already been announced, at least to this point, and that's U.S. men's national team winger Cade Cowell, who will join on loan from Chivas. The former San Jose Earthquakes man made a big jump to the Liga MX Giants a couple years ago, and that was seen as an important move for him to try to distance himself in the winger pool of the U.S. men's national team, and it kind of hasn't worked for him. I mean, he was always going to be facing an uphill battle, the type of player that Cade Cowell is. And while he had some success in the early bits of his tenure at Chivas, I think given that he was kind of overlooked in the last few seasons, it makes sense for him to move now and ahead of the World Cup. Do I think that that Cade Cowell would really make the World Cup team for the US with this move? I think he'd have to have a monster spring of 2026 for that to even be a discussion at this point, honestly. Hasn't been called into Pochettino's US team in a while, but this is the right move to make if he wants to get back in that conversation for sure. I think on paper, he fits in nicely to what the Red Bulls are trying to do. Of course, it's been much talked about that under Julian de Guzman and Michael Bradley, what we saw last year with Red Bulls 2 is they're going to try to play what will be uniform across all Red Bull teams thanks to Jurgen Klopp, is a possession style 4-3-3. They're not going to entirely abandon the pressing mantra that made Red Bull for so many years. But Cade Cowell, at the very least, you get a powerful forward who offers you something off the left. Even if he's not at his best, he still has intangibles, and that's the finishing ability, that's the pace, and that's the power. Even on his worst day, he's going to bring you all three of those things. And I think that's a good thing that the Red Bulls have kind of been missing. In terms of like players that they bring in, I think of a guy like Victor Bogash, who admittedly plays a different position from Cade Cowell, but you don't necessarily get those intangibles day in, day out. Cade Cowell is going to bring you that. And on the upside is you get a player who's, going to score maybe double digit goals if he's at his best. This is a guy who's, gotten even at his age, he's about our age, Luca. I think he's only
Yeah.
22 at this point, and he's scored loads of goals for San Jose Earthquakes in his day. He's got many, many appearances in MLS. This is a good, young player with a lot of confidence at his feet. Um, Now, I think it's going to be time to find out, is he going to be more of a soccer player than he's ever had to be in his past? That's what the kind of system the Red Bulls are going to set up might force him into becoming, which I think, he should be excited for that reason to play under a U.S. national team legend like Michael Bradley, who, certainly not a forward in his playing days, can definitely provide that little bit of soccer philosophy, that little bit of technical ability that Cade Cowell has been looking to unlock. I think it's a good move, not a DP forward by any means, but a player that's going to come in and like for like fill in the role that Lewis Morgan had. Do I think he'll be as successful as a healthy Lewis Morgan? Probably not. But I don't think the Red Bulls are done improving this particular position. So I like this signing as it opened up the offseason for New York, Luca.
Yeah, I completely agree. And he, I think, is the youngest MLS player ever to reach 100 appearances. So this is someone
Wow.
who brings a wealth of so much experience at such a young age. Obviously, at Chivas, it wasn't fully working out for him, and then it is a year-long loan. We'll see if we want to exercise the option in a year's time. But I like what you were saying about unlocking that part of his game, the more possession style, real proper football playing style. I'm trying to imagine him kind of in the teams of years past where it was fully Red Bull football, all the pressing, all the physicality, and I think he'd even maybe even fit better in some of those more physical 1v1 matchups. So it'll be interesting to see how he can kind of maybe be the personification of the way that the style is evolving. You have the pressing, the physicality off the ball play mixed with a possession style that hopefully he can try to unlock. I think it's a really exciting signing, kind of a bit of a USMNT reclamation project. Can he come back to MLS and ball out at a higher level than he was in San Jose? I think that would really help put him on the map. I don't know if there's enough of a timeline for him to be in Pochettino's World Cup roster, especially because Camp Cupcake in January is coming up, and I don't even know if he'd even be called in for that. So, but yeah, ultimately a great little signing that, like for Lewis Morgan and playing with, real proper wingers in a very predictable format, um, I think is going to be something that's really going to benefit this team. And I like the idea of him feeling like he has something to prove under a U.S. men's national team legend for a young American kid who still has a lot left in the tank to give.
And I mean, I think that also aptly describes the other big signing that the Red Bulls have been able to bring in at this point, and that's right back Justin Che. And if you were around U.S. soccer circles over the last 4 or 5 years, Justin Che was one of the most propped up names of any defensive prospect the U.S. have had. He was part of that group of FC Dallas Academy players that made the jump to Bayern Munich with their association there. Another big name that was part of that group, Chris Richards, who is really if you think about it, he's the U.S.'s premier defender at this current moment. Crystal Palace center back has made a great name for himself in the Premier League and has been an untouchable player for the U.S. national team. Justin Che was, admittedly a different type of player from Chris Richards, but was in that same category in terms of the expectations at one point in his career. And unfortunately, his moves never really panned out in Europe. And now he's at a point where he's probably going to make the jump back to MLS, and he's going to battle with Dylan Nealis for the starting right back job. And I think that's exactly the type of player the Red Bulls needed to find to replace Kyle Duncan, because there was never enough separation between Duncan and Dylan Nealis on a given day, right? If you wanted a more defensive approach out of the right back, you'd probably lean towards Nealis. If you wanted to unlock your fullbacks to get forward more, Duncan would probably have been the better option. But neither of them really put their stamp on the starting right back job. And this is a chance now for a young, hungry player who's roughly the same age as Cade Cowell and Justin Che. Didn't work out for him at Brøndby in Denmark. He was loaned out multiple times. Now the expectation for him is, can he come in and can he compete? This is a player with a whole lot of talent who just hasn't had the opportunity or the platform to really showcase that and be an important member of a squad in the first flight anywhere. And that's now the opportunity he has with the Red Bulls. I think Justin Che is a very talented player who, like Cade Cowell, could unlock a new part of his game under Michael Bradley. And we say all this as Michael Bradley's a very young manager. Not only is he young for an age for any manager, right? He's in his late 30s, but he's also only managed as a head coach for a few months with Red Bulls 2, a very successful short tenure, bringing them to MLS Next Pro Cup and winning the whole thing at Red Bull Arena. Luca, you and I were there. That was an unbelievable atmosphere, an unbelievable game from just about from both sides, everybody on the pitch. It was managed very beautifully by both managers. Both gave them a chance to win that game. But Michael Bradley had been doing great work with Red Bulls 2 for a while. And it's going to bring an interesting dynamic now because he's got these young players coming in. He's got two key members of this squad that stick out in Forsberg and Choupo-Moting as being his contemporaries in age, really. They're peers when you think about the careers that they've had and how old they are compared to Bradley. It's still a very young team across the board. And that's why I think the imprint that he can have on guys like Justin Che, Ed Cade Cowell, and, even a guy like Noah Ayla, who's not new to this squad, but is a young, important player for this team who's expected to eat up a lot of minutes in 2026. I think that's going to make for an interesting relationship of how Michael Bradley's imprint on the younger players will then affect the bigger, older players like Forsberg and Choupo-Moting to bring the best out of even them. I think it's going to be a very interesting dynamic. I know I kind of just threw a lot at you, but if you want to focus on just Justin Che and what you think he can provide for the Red Bulls at the right back position, do we think he's going to start over Dylan Nealis come the beginning of the season? Is Cameron Harper still an option at right back, or will he be used exclusively as a winger? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the competition between Che and Dylan Nealis is a great one. I think you don't want him to just be a lock starter. I think you kind of want him to work and get acclimated to the system. But I think he has so much potential. I think Michael Bradley maybe sees himself in a lot of these young guys. Che, one of them, trying to make the jump in Europe and not finding so much success. And I'm sure there's so much that Michael Bradley has knowledge about in that area of um, what we've seen as sometimes a disconcerting trend of American guys making the jump too early and it really stagnates the rest of their entire career. So I think this could be a really positive redirection for Justin Che, and I think the right back position is mostly in good hands. I think if one of those guys goes down, it'll be a little difficult. We'll see if Cameron Harper is a right wing back still. We'll see if Juan Mina is able to finally make the jump up to the first team a little bit. He showed some flashes in that MLS Next Pro playoffs run. So I think the position competition there is pretty solid, and the depth there is mostly pretty solid. But yeah, in terms of the philosophy that Michael Bradley has as a coach, I think for a lot of the domestic homegrown guys, whether they're homegrown coming from the Red Bulls Academy, like Cowell or Che from other parts of the country. I think maybe that was an area that just by nature of, a shared upbringing, Sandro Schwartz had less of an ability to connect with a lot of these young guys on that level based on his experience from Germany. And so I think I'm really excited about the man management from Michael Bradley that I feel like didn't always shine through in the way that Sandro managed his squad. Um, I think I'm very excited to see how he builds these individual relationships with these young players. We know that in press conferences, and we'll have the introductory press conference next week with him and Julian de Guzman. He is very level-headed, takes his time to respond to questions, and really thinks through his responses. And so I think um, just in terms of his availability to the media, we'll be able to learn a lot about how he's not just thinking tactically about the entire squad, but how he's thinking about each of his individual players, not just as pieces of the squad, but as people and as players with unique skill sets. And it's something that even though he is such a new coach, I think of him in a bit of a similar way as I do looking back thinking about Jesse Marsh. I know it's not a perfect comparison, but thinking about a manager who had one very mediocre MLS season under his belt with the Montreal Impact in 2012. Um, I think it was 2012. He had, I think, 2 seasons off after that with no managerial experience post Montreal. Get signed before 2015. People think he doesn't have enough experience. He's a young manager, whatever, and led the team to become the winningest coach in franchise history. I'm not saying Michael Bradley will become that, but I think I'm willing to take a chance on a younger, hungrier coach who this is his first opportunity in the role, and he has a big chance to strike when the iron is hot and really get it right. But but yeah, just a really, really pivotal season. The first ever, I believe the first ever, or no, well, besides Mike Petke and Richie Williams, he's the third ever player to transition to be a coach. And we'll see if he can have a tenure maybe longer than those two guys. Also the first ever father-son coaching pair in MLS history, Bob Bradley and Michael Bradley, both happening to be at the same club, since Bob Bradley had part of his long career at the Metro Stars. But yeah, I don't know if you want to talk more about Bradley or go in a different direction, but an interesting hire that I am cautiously optimistic about.
Optimism with it as well. I was always a huge Michael Bradley fan in his playing days, even when he was playing against the New York Red Bulls with Toronto FC. It's always a pleasure to have him back in his home state. And yes, he's lived in many areas. He still considers New Jersey his home. Heard that straight from the horse's mouth. I remember at his introductory press conference when he took over the Red Bulls 2 job, he mentioned, like, I grew up with one of the best soccer coaches around in my
Yeah.
household. I think if you ask, and this is, this dead horse has already been beaten, but if you've asked around when people have given their thoughts on this hiring, everyone has said, yes, Michael Bradley's a young manager, but everybody's kind of known he was going to be a manager since he was a young player himself. So I think there's a whole lot of reason to be optimistic. I think the Jesse Marsh comparisons are somewhat apt. I think if you want to continue down that line, before he was the manager in Montreal, he was an assistant under Bob Bradley with the U.S. national team. Jesse Marsh was. And I think just the attractiveness of the soccer that Red Bulls 2 played, I think is enough to excite any Red Bulls fans. I know not every fan of the first team keeps close tabs or a close eye on the reserves, but I mean, the two of us can attest to the fact that they played much prettier soccer than the first team did at any point of 2025. And that was amplified by Michael Bradley taking over the head coaching role there midway through the season. Ibrahim Sakaya, I know some folks have mentioned that he might have been overlooked for that, and I think there's maybe some truth in that. I don't know what Ibrahim Sakaya is thinking in terms of what happened there, but as an assistant with the first team, and he's going to stay on in that role, I think is a perfect place for him. I mean, that's a Red Bull guy through and through, both in New York and previously in Europe. For him to come and stick at this club and have an assistant role, it feels like that's like a lifetime job that he could potentially have, which I would love to keep Sakaya around in that role. As a media figure, it would be great to see his imprint on the team long term, and I think fans would enjoy that as well. And of course, we will speak more about Michael Bradley following his introductory press conference. Interesting to hear what he will have to say about, continuing to coach a team that's primarily comprised of young players, but also has a few players that will be his peers, what it will be like, filling in at an MLS job for the first time, his initial conversations and interactions have been with the new players, and what we can expect from the squad moving forward. In terms of other players that have come back in, we can mention that re-signings of Tim Parker for one more year and AJ Marcucci, which I think came as a bit more of a surprise to some other folks that came when it did and as long as it did. It's a 4-year extension for AJ Marcucci, who folks will remember tore his ACL in that Open Cup quarterfinal against Philadelphia Union in August. So he will be out for an extended period of time into 2026, but he will be remaining with the club for 4 more seasons. Tim Parker back for another year, and I believe with an additional year's option as well. He earned that. I mean, he played his way into earning that contract extension. In the offseason of 2024, Tim Parker didn't have a club and didn't really have many prospects until he reached out to Red Bull, and then they put that together. And then he, made a more team-friendly contract than Sean Nealis had. They were essentially filling the same role in the team, and he beat out Sean Nealis in the end. That's kind of reading between the lines what happened with Parker. Of course, in his second stint with the club, many fans will remember him between 2018 and 2020, was a big contributor on the back line, was part of that amazing defense and supporter shield winning team in 2018. Aaron Long ultimately went away with the MLS Defender of the Year award, but I think, and I will always believe this, it could have gone to either one of them. They
Mhm.
complemented each other so well. I believe the idea for Parker is that he's going to come off the bench. For Marcucci, it seemed for a while like he was going to be in pole position to take over the number one shirt from Carlos Coronel. That injury kind of at least puts a delay in that. And that prompted the transfer for John McCarthy from LA Galaxy. As it stands, it probably looks like he will be the starter at the beginning of 2026. Aiden Stokes has a claim to it with how good he's been, the homegrown from Red Bulls too. And then I think that also brings in the discussion of the draft pick Tomas Hutt out of Syracuse, who I played against in high school growing up,
Yeah,
playing
wow.
for Seton Hall Prep. I'll never forget that 1-1 draw we had my junior year. I think we probably should have won it. I don't know if their goal crossed the line, but I digress. And of course, I'm going to butcher his last name, but Tobias Suchik, is that how you say it?
I think it's Shevchik. This is just based on like
Shevchik. That
one video I
sounds
saw of
more
him saying his
correct.
name.
Okay.
Shevchik.
So
Yeah.
apologies to Tobias Shevchik, but he's likely to be the starter for Red Bulls too moving forward since Aiden Stokes is going to make the jump to the first team. Your thoughts on bringing Parker and Marcucci back, and then we can really sink our teeth in position by position.
Parker, I think, is a good short term. You get him on another 1 year deal with an option, see how he performs. I don't think center back is fully finished. I think the Sean Nealis departure, we're going to need to reinforce that somewhere else. And look, just for the nostalgia factor, he is the last remaining player who was a part of the 2018 Supporter Shield who is currently on the roster. Yes, he did go away for a few years, bopped around MLS, but ultimately he has that experience from that golden era. He was able to, yeah, as you said, play himself back into a starting position by the end of the season, which I didn't fully expect. In the first half of the season, he had such little minutes and was really able to make a name for himself. He even scored in Montreal in that the final regular season win of the season for the Red Bulls. And so I'm excited to see him be a rotational piece. Maybe not necessarily the starter if they bring in anyone else, but but yeah, just having him next to Noah Isla, I think would be a great way to start off 2026. And then Marcucci, I agree, was a bit surprised about the long-term extension. I think they really do kind of buy into him being the next big thing. I think if he stays healthy, he could easily kind of play John McCarthy out of a starting role by the end of the year. John McCarthy also, I could easily see him being shopped around by the end of next season if Marcucci is healthy and is able to get stuck in. It's just important, I think, to have a domestic keeper who eventually Carlos Coronel did get his visa and green card and all of that, but demanded a lot of wages on the roster. And I think if you can kind of keep the goalkeeper position a bit lighter, kind of like how Luis Robles was, not demanding, an insane wage that I think was maybe close to like a TAM contract for him. Um, it's something where I feel like I liked aspects about Marcucci's game, especially in the Open Cup run is where we really got to saw him shine. Um, but I do agree about the long-term contract being a bit concerning. But again, players can be shopped around at any time with any amount of years remaining on their contract. And so I think it's a bit of a gamble to keep him locked in for this long, especially with Aiden Stokes' rise. Shevchik being on a homegrown first team roster spot as of January 1st. And then drafting Tomas Hutt. We'll see if he gets any type of contract with Red Bulls too. We don't even know the fate of Austin Causey either with Red Bulls too.
That's also true.
So there
The
is just a
hero from
lot
the
of,
final.
yeah, exactly. So there's just a lot of goalkeepers, and I think a lot of people were surprised to see the Red Bulls draft a goalkeeper in the MLS Super Draft. But yeah, it's a pretty crowded group. I think one piece will kind of eventually have to give. Maybe that's McCarthy, but it seems like it's not going to be Marcucci. It seems like they want him to be the guy. And off the field, I think he's a great locker room guy, great personality, kind of local guy from Pennsylvania, and so I think he has the capacity to really grow into a really strong fan favorite goalkeeper. That can really be a big vocal leader in the back. But yeah, I agree the length of the contract was a little bit surprising, but ultimately happy to keep him around and give him another shot.
And I think if it says anything, it says the belief is still there. I remember Jochen Schneider saying at the end of season press conference in 2024 that they fully believe that when AJ Marcucci came back from his loan in Finland, where he helped, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the club he played at's name, but he helped keep them up from relegation. That's a massive achievement, to go to at his age, to go to a brand new country, brand new league midway through the season and be the goalkeeper that helps the club avoid relegation. I mean, there's no equivalent for that in an MLS. There just isn't.
Yeah.
And for him to have gone and done that, I think was incredible experience. And I think he came back a better goalkeeper because of it. Really unfortunate to see him have that injury the way that it happened. You know, for it to be the way that they concede the final goal to knock them out of the cup and for him to go down during it was an awful sight, and you hope he comes back stronger. But knowing his attitude, Luca, you mentioned like his presence in the locker room. He's a resilient guy, and I think he'll come back. And we'll see about when he's able to come back. Speaking from experience, as a someone who played out in the field, it usually takes around a year to come back from an
Mhm.
ACL and subsequent
Mhm.
surgery. But I don't know what the specific case would be for a goalkeeper or what he's going through individually. So we'll wait and see. It probably will be McCarthy to start the year. And I think that brings us nicely to the position grades. And this is how we close it out. We're going to go through 7 different groups of players: goalkeepers, fullbacks, center backs, deep lying midfielders, and attacking midfielders. We're going to be a little bit liberal about how we define a deep lying midfielder there, and then
Mhm.
wingers and strikers. We're going to give a letter grade like you would in class, and we'll kind of speak about how the Red Bulls and Julian de Guzman should navigate the squad moving forward. Of course, there are MLS roster constraints. We're not going to consider that as we just discuss who should come in and who should go. But with that, let's start with the goalkeepers. Luca, you seem to have a more positive outlook on the goalkeeper ranks than most Red Bulls fans do at the moment. If you had to give them a grade, what would it be?
I'm leaning toward B plus, and there's not that much movement you can really do now. John McCarthy, we only saw him play in one game. I would like to think that his 2024 and 2022 MLS Cup winning seasons are not that far removed from his game. Look, he moved here midseason, wasn't getting a lot of minutes. He was on an LA Galaxy team that was just the vibes around that squad are really bad. So I'm hopeful that he can be better than he was on decision day. It's something where I'm not overly optimistic about him contributing all the way from probably opening day through the World Cup break in the summer. But it's a position where I feel like we kind of needed someone new in the back, um, to be a bit more of a vocal leader on the pitch. Don't know if that'll be McCarthy, but I know that kind of where we're at right now, a lot of fans are saying the Red Bulls have to sign another keeper. John McCarthy can't be the starting keeper. John McCarthy will be the starting keeper. I don't see how they would fit 5 first team keepers on the roster. They're not going to be doing that. And so I'm mainly saying B plus just because they have their vision, they pick their guys. It's not as great as I would like. I would have maybe liked someone with a bit of like a higher profile than John McCarthy, but I also am aware of his past and his success in MLS, 2 MLS Cups in the span of 3 seasons. I think that's something that he can really harness and kind of put, the crazy last season he had, which included a 7-0 defeat to the New York Red Bulls. Um, put that in the past. I think I'm kind of optimistic that he can start fresh, and I don't think fans should kind of write him off from that one performance on decision day. I'm excited to see how a full offseason with the group is going to help him, uh, hopefully get more stuck in. But But yeah, we're pretty full at the keeper position, so I don't expect any more moves there.
Yeah, I think that that's the one thing that the Marcucci signing, if it didn't already indicate that the club has confidence in him individually, but it kind of cemented that this is going to be the goalkeeper room for 2026 at least. Like you mentioned, that's already a long list. There's four goalkeepers currently under the first team banner right now. We expect a guy like Tobias Svecik, whose last name I'm now hopefully pronouncing properly. He'll be with Red Bulls too, and it'll be Marcucci, Aiden Stokes, and John McCarthy with the first team. Of course, Marcucci gonna have to work his way back into the team. I'm gonna go with a C plus, playing a little bit of devil's advocate to you here, Luca, because while I do think that John McCarthy, you look around MLS, as far as like a stopgap starting goalkeeper, I think he fits that bill perfectly. I think that's
Mhm.
you don't want to go, you know. You don't want to go for Dane St. Clair if
Yeah.
that means that he's only going to be with the team for X amount of time. If you're looking to get a younger foundational goalkeeper like a Marcucci, like an Aiden Stokes to step up, then I think McCarthy makes sense. This is a guy who's won big games, has been good in big moments, maybe consistently week in and week out, not stronger than an average MLS goalkeeper. And I think that's a fair way to describe how good he was in 2024. Admittedly, behind an awful LA Galaxy defense. I mean, the Red Bulls put up 7 goals against them in May of 2025. He was the goalkeeper in that match at Red Bull Arena, or excuse me, at Sports Illustrated Stadium. Gotta get used to that still. So again, I'm going to be a bit harsh by saying it's a C plus because while I do think that on their day the Red Bulls will have an average to slightly below average MLS goalkeeper in a starting goalkeeper on a given match day. I think this is the right path for the squad moving forward. So I do want to include a caveat there. I do think it'll be McCarthy to start the season, but I'd love to see Aiden Stokes really challenge him for that. I mean, this is a guy who's
Yeah.
been an incredible standout with Red Bulls 2, has been a regular in U.S. youth national teams. This is a player with an incredibly high ceiling, and I hope that I think an example that we see right across the Delaware River in Philadelphia is Andrew Rick is roughly the same age as Aiden Stokes and has been given that type of trust as a
Yeah.
backup full time. And for the times when Andre Blake was out this season, we're talking about Andre Blake. We're talking about arguably the best goalkeeper in a Major League Soccer history, one of the best goalkeepers to ever come out of North America. And they didn't miss a beat when he wasn't on the field because they gave that type of belief to Andrew Rick and he was able to come up big in moments. He was a good cup keeper. He was good when he featured in Blake's absence in MLS. And I think that Aiden Stokes, can kind of follow that similar approach. And I would love to see him get some starts with Red Bull New York's first team in 2026. So you go B plus, I go C plus. Let's go to the fullback position. We've got a new fullback in the ranks in Justin Che, a like for like replacement with Kyle Duncan. We'll see what happens with the left backs because right now it's Marcelo Morales, it's Omar Valencia, and it's Raheem Edwards. I think they only went to 3 last season because after the Morales signing came in, it was clear that he would not be fit to play for a while. And he only really did feature for the team at the end of 2025 and thought he showed some promise through Leagues Cup in the end of the season when he did. I'm not sure if they're going to move on from Edwards because he was that third guy that they brought in, provides a lot of MLS experience, would kind of fit the bill of the type of player that the Red Bulls are trying to move on from. But to have a
Mhm.
domestic fullback could also he's Canadian, of course, but domestic for MLS roster rules
Mhm.
could also fit in. Nicely for what the club is trying to do. So we'll see what happens with left back. We don't think it's a finished product yet. But for now, and I'll give my grade first, I'm going to go with a B minus here. I know it feels a bit negative because Justin Che, while we both spoke very highly of him, Luca, is still a work in progress. We have to see where he's at when he comes in. And as for the left back, while we're both certainly bullish, pun intended, about Marcelo Morales, it's not necessarily his job to win, and we don't know what the future looks like for a guy like Omar Valencia or for Raheem Edwards with this club. I'm going to go with a B minus for now. I think it's an unfinished product for the most part, but a lot of things to be excited about at fullback, Luca.
Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna kind of go B to B minus. Maybe I'll just be slightly more positive and go with B, hoping that Marcel Morales will hit. I'm also kind of a bit confused about why Omar Valencia really just fell off. He was a massive contributor at the beginning of 2025, showed incredible promise, beautiful whipping crosses in. I think he racked up like 5 assists in the first 7 or 8 games or something like that. And then it really was Raheem Edwards through the end of the year, and there wasn't much uh, space for Valencia to come back, and it wasn't fully really explained, if I remember correctly, why that was. I'm hopeful that Marcelo Morales can be a lot more adjusted than he was last year. A lot of minutes with the second team, obviously dealing with his longer term injury when he came. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they kind of leave it at those three guys and kind of leave the position untouched. I think right back with Justin Che is a bit more of a lock. But again, I would say the third guy, if you don't consider Cameron Harper, is Juan Mina, and that's another project that I think a lot of Red Bulls fans would be happy if the organization moved on from him. But with with the 3-3 their right back slightly stronger if you consider Harper, excuse me. I think it's a place where I'm not necessarily thinking they're going to make any crazy moves really. I think for defensive reinforcements, we'd probably be in the market for a center back more than a fullback at this point. So I'm going to say B slightly just because I'm optimistic about Justin Che and the competition with Dylan Nealis there. I think Dylan Nealis has his form has just really steadily increased since his signing in 2022. And then left back it's really a matter of if Marcelo Morales hits or not. Again, a bit more of a possession minded left back, which is something that I think fits this style of play and something that will be exciting to see. And I really hope Omar Valencia can kind of get stuck back in and maybe be the second string left back under Marcelo Morales. But I think if any of those guys go down, Raheem Edwards has been reliable enough in terms of getting minutes. Not necessarily a fan favorite for a lot of reasons, but I think the fullbacks are mostly kind of set. Could be a bit stronger, but I think they're really just banking on Morales and Che to be big hits in 2026.
Slightly tangentially, on the idea that Cameron Harper could be a right back. He has been a right back in the past for this Red Bulls team, especially when they play him as a wing back with a back three. That's not going to be the approach that the Red Bulls take to 2026. It was pretty clear that after the success that system had in the 2024 playoffs, that the roster was constructed ahead of 2025 with that shape in mind. That's why they brought in an extra center backs the way that they did, and that didn't work out. And they quickly had to shift back to playing a back four, and the team was, never really hit the ground running after that, but was certainly better than they were at the beginning part of the season. When Julian de Guzman was speaking about bringing in new players at the end of season press conference, he mentioned Harper's ability to be used as a fullback. So we'll see if, and again, he's not the manager, he's not going to pick the team, it's going to be Michael Bradley, but we'll see if that is something that we anticipate out of Cameron Harper, because let's say they bring in another starting winger, maybe a DP winger, and you have a front three of Cowell, Choupo-Moting, and insert DP winger here on the opposite side, then that frees up a place for Cameron Harper to start at the fullback position. And I think that makes for a very, very strong team. But again, we will wait and see on if that happens. We anticipate moves to continue to come in various parts of the squad. And another area we think that's going to happen is the center back ranks. Mentioned that the team brought in extra center backs at the end of 2024 to try to play that system. They lost Andres Reyes. They brought in Alexander Hack and Tim Parker. And Hack is currently the most expensive defender the team has right now, and certainly did not play like that in 2025. It's going to be interesting to see if they do anything with that player's contract. It's certainly a burden on the squad at the moment. They've shed some of the TAM weight with Duncan and Lewis Morgan. I think the next domino that's got to fall there would be Alexander Hack. Can't imagine he would have many suitors in Major League Soccer, just with that heavy contract being the way that it is, and his performances in 2025 certainly left a little bit to be desired. A center back who's great in possession and can put in a strong tackle, but was certainly victimized with his pace moving forward. So I think there has to be a solution to the Alexander Hack problem, and we'll wait and see what that was. Of course, that's a Sandro Schwartz guy. That was a reuniting of those two player-coach relationship in 2025 for the Red Bulls. from back in their time in Mainz, respectively. So I'm currently going to give the center backs. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to give it a B minus because while I think that they did the right thing moving on from Sean Nealis and bringing back Tim Parker, Noah Ayla is a stud. I think he's the best center back the Red Bulls have had since prime Tim Parker and prime Aaron Long. And I think in terms of his ability to be all rounded and be very good with the ball at his feet, as well as being a solid defender, I don't think we've had a player like that since Tim Ream.
Yeah.
And I say we because Tim Ream was back in the days when I was showing up as a fan, sitting in the
Mhm.
seats, and I couldn't be more happy to see the career that he went on to have, both in England and now back in MLS. And I think he'll be at the World Cup this summer for sure under Mauricio Pochettino. Um, Noah Ayla, a player that I'm very, very big on. Tim Parker, a fan favorite that I'm glad to see coming back. Alexander Hack, I think, is one that the Red Bulls will have to move on from. It will be easier said than done in terms of that contract. I'm going to go B minus just because I think they're not done yet, and because in a jam, Parker proved last season that he can be a guy to fill in when they need.
Yeah, I'm gonna go C plus, so similar to B minus. I think I I'm not optimistic about Hack being offloaded in any way. I think it's something that would take a lot of work, like you were saying, just the high wage, just the lack of familiarity with MLS, not an insane amount of minutes. Again, he was kind of played to the bench, especially for someone with his wages, is not great roster building. Um, I think Tim Parker is great, happy to have his experience and have him sticking around, but not a player who's taking this roster to the next level. Noah Isla is really the shining star of the center back ranks. Another thing to consider too is Justin Che is kind of reported to potentially maybe even flex in and be that right center back if needed to compete kind of with Parker. And so um, I think if you think about Justin Che as being able to flex in that way, um, it makes things a little bit better, but ultimately, I would love to go in line with the proactive um, changing over of the roster. If De Guzman is able to get Hack out and bring in another center back with a much higher ceiling and lower wages, I think would be incredible and kind of bump my grade up to a B. I feel like another season of having Alexander Hack on the roster, whether he's playing a lot or not, with his salary is something that's not necessarily sustainable. If we do really want to bring in um, more quality players who are not necessarily the third DP, um, I think we'll do okay to start 2025 with the current state, or 2026 with the current state of the roster at center back. But yeah, I would love to see a bit more movement there, one more move to really sure things up. As you said, we don't need as many without the back five system, um, but it feels like there could be some gaps, especially if one of those guys goes down with an injury, as something to be mindful of.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to another position where it feels like maybe they're not done in terms of moving players in or out, and that's going to be in deep lying midfielders. Normally, when you go through positions, you separate six, eights, and tens. This time, I think we're going to kind of combine the six and the eights together because it's honestly, it's a bit unclear if the Rebels will be playing with a double pivot in the six and an eight, or if they'll be playing with one holding midfielder sat behind two other players, similar to how Red Bulls 2 were set up. But within that ranks, it would include, of course, Daniel Edelman, Ronald Donkor, Gustav Berggren, who was the marquee signing of the Red Bulls summer window in 2025, and then the player who I'm most excited about, and the player who I've been most excited about coming through the Red Bulls ranks in a long time, and that's Adri Mehmeti, who was unbelievable for Red Bulls 2 this past season. 16-year-old captain of a professional side, and he was arguably their best player from start to finish all year. I think this is a player we're going to see feature for the first team. Do I think he'll be in a week in, week out starting role? Probably not. Do I think he'll feature, regularly off the bench? I think maybe semi-regularly is the best way to put it. This is a player who can absolutely learn from the likes of Michael Bradley and already has for the past 6 months with Red Bulls too. For that reason, I'm going to give them a B, just a straight up B for the holding midfielders. I think they have a good nexus of players here in terms of Donkor, is one that I think maybe has been overlooked, both by Sandro Schwartz and by supporters for just how valuable he can be. I mean, there was a long time through the 2025 season where it felt like, Edelman and Stroud, for, as talented and hardworking players as they are, who will die for the badge, both being homegrowns, couldn't find ways to progress the ball forward meaningfully. And then Donkor would come on and would be the solution to that issue. Now, there were other issues that were not solved in terms of how can they get scoring from their wingers, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Donkor is a player that you can be excited about. I think Bergen, we haven't seen enough of him yet to find out what his imprint on the squad will be. Certainly going to be an important member of this team moving forward. A TAM central midfielder was brought in to be a winner. He's a guy who's won at every club he's been to before, whether in Sweden or in Poland. And then Mehmeti, I think the ceiling is so high for him. Daniel Edelman is a guy that you can rely on to be a defensive rock in your midfield. Will he be with this club moving forward? I think the Red Bulls are still hearing offers on him. I'm not sure if that means they're going to try to bring in another player of his liking in return. But the Red Bulls were rumored to be interested in Luca De La Torre. He signed with Charlotte FC. The Red Bulls were one of many teams mentioned in an article that said they would be interested in Meka and Ellie. I think that would be the exact type of holding midfield profile you'd want to play under Michael Bradley. I don't think there's a whole lot of strength to that rumor. So we'll see what the final ranks look like. But for now, I'm going to give them a B. I think there's a solid foundation there, and I think there's room to grow if Adri Mehmeti can fill in sooner rather than later.
I agree with B. I'll go slightly B minus just to be a bit different, but yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think Donkor is the type of player who fans were hoping would take a big leap in 2025 after showing some real promise toward the end of 2024. Um, Again, in this possession style, you need more of a ball progressing player in the six and eight positions. Bergen is someone who, as you said, we haven't seen much of. I think another guy who is the second or third highest paid player on the roster, and so someone you really need to expect a lot out of. This is a guy that Red Bull, obviously more under Jochen Schneider, were chasing since summer 2024, and so someone they have believed in. It's a type of player where there's just not enough of a big sample size yet. It's kind of crazy to think we have more of a sample size, at least in our own system with Adri Mehmeti, and fans are more excited about a 16-year-old than a signing from a Swedish signing who has balled out in the Polish league. But I think we're mostly in a good spot. I think Daniel Edelman is someone who, again, fan favorite, local guy, but if we were to move on from him, I think we would just have to adequately fill that gap, and we'd kind of be right back around to B. Um, if we're kind of really relying on Mehmeti to take a big jump this year, and I think it would be a very similar Tyler Adams-esque kind of just getting thrown in at a young age after high success. He's definitely the most highly touted holding midfielder since Tyler Adams.
Yep.
I am skipping over Daniel Edelman, obviously, just because the Mehmeti stock is that high, and to have a trophy winning season as officially, I mean, reports or stat keepers saying the youngest ever captain of a professional side to win a trophy. You can argue if MLS Next Pro is professional or not, um, but I think his ceiling is something that's really exciting. Do I think he's going to really be a big starter in 2026? Not necessarily. I think if Edelman stays, I think the biggest question for me is Ronald Donkor, if he's really like a big, big central part of Michael Bradley's possession-based plans. Um, I think if Edelman does stick around, I would say like the next domino to fall would probably be Donkor, unfortunately, and that's someone who I really like aspects of his game, and I think he has shown some growth. But if he really goes off in 2026, I think this brings it up from like a B minus to an A minus. And it's the type of position that I feel like Red Bull has traditionally kept pretty strong and have had a lot of good domestic guys come through the academy and second team. But But yeah, Donkor is one that I'm out of the four of them besides Mehmeti. Very interested in seeing his progression, and if he's able to ascend to another level, I think this team can really cook in the attacking phase of the game.
As far as it goes for a player like Daniel Edelman, I think for a long time, myself included, a lot of people looked at him and thought, this is a player who, you know, has garnered some interest from Europe. Leagues like Belgium, I think, are the ones that have been spoken about the most in relation to Edelman, but also a guy that maybe his not that I want to put this upon him, but his ceiling might be great MLS holding midfielder.
Mhm.
And for a lot of folks, that was like, this is a career Red Bull player. This is a guy
Mhm.
who grew up in the system, loves the club. You saw the passion on his face when he scored that penalty to eliminate the Crew in the 2024 playoffs. This is a guy who could be a future captain for your club, a bedrock foundational piece. But the argument against that is, have we seen enough growth in his ability to play with the ball over the past couple seasons? And I think between 2023 and 2025, there's been improvement, but has it been enough improvement to suggest to someone and say, hey, this is going to be your holding midfielder for the next 4 years, 5 years? And I don't think he improved enough in that regard to suggest that. And I think that's why so many people are excited about Adri Mehmeti, because that's what he provides. Not
Mhm.
only was he clogging up every passing lane and putting in strong challenges in MLS Next Pro, but he also added that additional element to his game that Edelman has been very upfront about wanting to improve upon. But I don't think he's improved enough where he's going to be that relied upon guy in that role. Do I think that, they should definitely move on from him ahead of 2026? I don't know about that. I think he can certainly still do a job and could for some time. If that interest from Belgium is real, I would absolutely suggest that the club look for him to explore that, for him and his own personal growth as a player to go explore that. Um, if he were to be moved somewhere within the league, I wouldn't even, you know, tell the Red Bulls that they should definitely not do that either, because I think there's there's still work to be done with this roster, even at this position. So, like you mentioned, whether it's Edelman or Donkor, I'm not sure that they're done here, and that there's another player that they could even use to bring in to say, hey, Audrey Mehmeti, this is the type of player you need to emulate and you need to learn from. That's why I mentioned the Emeka Eneli, because if Edelman is moved on from and they bring in Eneli, that's your six. Berggren's your eight. You have Mehmeti
Mhm.
as your second choice six, and you have Donkor as your second choice eight. And I think that makes for a really interesting double pivot. Do I think Emeka Eneli, has the ability in possession like a Darlington Nagbe? Probably not, but it
Mhm.
certainly would be an improvement in that area over Edelman. But again, that's a very unlikely scenario. That's just the type of player that I'm thinking would fit nicely under Michael Bradley's plans and would help Audrey Mehmeti for the future. So
Mhm.
B and B minus for holding midfielders and the six and eights. Let's talk about the tens. Obviously, the marquee player for this club, Emil Forsberg, the captain. He's the number 10. Behind him on the roster right now is Wiki Carmona, and newly promoted from the second team, officially completing his transfer from Estudiantes de La Plata in Argentina, is Juan Benedetti. And Benedetti was a real force for Red Bulls 2 in attacking midfield. This is a player that I think can come off the bench pretty regularly moving forward. The Wiki Carmona discussion continues into 2026. Currently, the longest tenured player at the club. Thank you for
Mhm.
correcting me on my original post when I thought it was Cameron Harper. Carmona
Yeah.
beat Harper by about 2 months and started in the opening match of the 2021 season, or 2022 season, was it?
2021 season.
2021 season. Wow.
Yeah.
For him to be the longest tenured player, I think says more about the club around him than it does about him himself. But
Mhm.
this is a player who probably should not have played as many games as he did last year and was certainly asked to carry the burden of the attack more than he was capable of. He's a player that's got loads of talent, but really wasn't beaming with confidence in 2025. I think adding Benedetti in to compete with that similar role, I think we'll see flashes of Benedetti behind Forsberg. Um, and for that reason, I'm going to be a bit positive when I say B plus for this group. Forsberg is going to give you Forsberg every game. But can Benedetti, be a similar player to what we saw with the reserves? Because that would be a very welcome addition to the club. And if Carmona, can step up in less of a high responsible role in 2026. I think that would be a fair call for him. But this is another player that the Red Bulls, should they have the opportunity to, should absolutely explore moving on from him. So I go B plus. Your thoughts here, Luca?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go B minus. I think there's this the one side of me that thinks it would just be so classic, and fitting of the club to keep Wiki Carmona around. But there's a part of me that thinks De Guzman is eyeing a move for him, and that's something that I think would be exciting to help elevate that position a little bit if they can bring in another um, type of 10. Benedetti, again, obviously so much praise about him, so influential in the MLS Next Pro season last year. Um, I feel like Forsberg had an incredible season last year, but I'm curious also if the pace of the game in a more possession style using younger players is something that is going to be hard for him. And Chupo, again, different type of player, but for someone who's really trying to set the tempo of the game, it feels like Forsberg is just by nature of age and having a bit more hold up play tendencies, is something that I feel like I'm curious to see how he's going to adapt under the Michael Bradley system. So I'm slightly less optimistic about that. Again, this is the last year on Forsberg's contract. I believe he does have an option, but
He does.
this is something that we could be thinking about come end of next season. What do we pick up Forsberg's option? Do we re-sign him? I would not be surprised if this is Forsberg's last season with the club, just based on the trajectory of how things are going with Michael Bradley at the helm and De Guzman. And so I'm just curious how Forsberg will adjust a little bit. Again, class player in Europe with the Swedish national team, knows how to adjust and adapt and continue to be dangerous. Um, but it's something where I feel like it's a bit weak if any again if any one of these guys goes down. It's just kind of one of the things I'm thinking of. Um, thinking of putting Wiki Cremona out there as much as he played last season. Again, Sandro Schwartz mentioned his off the ball qualities as being one of the biggest things that was, keeping him in a starting spot. Again, the style is less hell bent on being off the ball. Um, I think slightly less optimistic than you, but I'll keep it in the B range. Excited for Benedetti's rise. Just someone who really ascended really quickly. I think was the I think he was the real main Red Bulls 2 signing that I didn't really see any fans say, "Oh, we're just signing a kid who's unproven, yada yada yada." I think
Yeah.
everyone was really excited about Benedetti being a part of the first team, and someone that fans were saying should have gotten promoted last summer to the first team. So it's a position where I think their performances will really depend on the wingers and the strikers ahead of them. So we'll get to that now.
Yeah, let's start with the wingers. This is another interesting one. I think they're not done in this area of the field
Yep.
either. As of now, if the season were to start tomorrow, you'd start the match with Cameron Harper on the right and
Yep.
Cade Cowell on the left, and you'd have loads of options to choose from on the bench. Rafael Mosquera, Andy Rojas, Sergin Goma, Dennis Yangor. I think that's the crux of the wide attacking players you'd have. And at its best, Harper and Cowell, that's pretty strong.
Mhm.
And with the notion that they're probably going to bring in another player in this position, and when I say another player, I mean a third DP. Julian de Guzman has been very open about the fact that it's a goal, it is a target to bring in a third DP. Will it be done before the season starts? I don't know. Not much noise surrounding the Red Bulls and any marquee wingers at the moment. I mean, there was it was really hopeful discussion from fans that with the Mo Salah situation going on in Liverpool, could Red Bull, with the Jurgen Klopp influence, come in and sign Mohamed Salah? Don't think there was ever any interest in that actually happening. Um, but I do think that there is promise within these ranks. Rojas showed that he could be a proper player with Red Bulls too. Mosquera, a player that that team leaned on in times where they struggled, taking big penalties. And in that cup final, for him to be a powerful winger was huge to their success, especially late in that season's run. And then you get to players like Serge Goma, Dennis Yengor. Yengor, another player that feels like a bit of a roster burden in terms of being a U22 player, who just hasn't panned out to be an international player in that role. Seems like something of a drain on the squad. And a player I didn't mention actually, who is really naturally a striker, but has played as a winger and has been very successful at moments, is Mohamed Sofo, who I think is another really good option on the bench. Was supposedly rumored to be on the interest of Aston Villa, but I believe that was debunked by Joe Pantorno of AM New York. Shout out to the great beat reporter Joe Pantorno, rumored that one as false. And then Ngoma, who's another homegrown player, but who just hasn't been able to shake his injuries ever in his career, unfortunately, because he's another powerful player with so much promise. Should he not have had his injury struggles, I think this is a player that you talk about as a day in and day out starter in Major League Soccer. A really promising talent. I think that should they bring in a big DP in this role, and you have Cowell, Harper, and then Rojas, and then Mosquera down the line. We're talking about this is the A range. But since they don't have that player yet, I'm going to stick them again at a B plus. And again, bringing in that player, like I mentioned before, could open up a path where Cameron Harper plays as a right fullback, and then you just bring more talent on the pitch at once. That would be music to a lot of the fans' ears. I'll say B plus here, Luca, and let's hear what you have.
Yeah, I'm gonna go B minus mainly because we have a lot of the younger guys like Andy Rojas, Rafa Mosquera, Dennis Younger taking up international roster spots, and I think that's something where they're gonna have to move a piece around. I think if they were to move a piece around this offseason, it would probably have to be Goma or Yengor. I think
Or honestly, both.
or honestly both. I would be very open to both. Younger is a very interesting player. It feels like he hasn't really hit his potential, um, and and as someone that I feel like um, a lot of fans would not really notice has left the roster. Goma, just such an unfortunate tenure for still such a young player at only 20 years old, turning 21, I believe.
Still only
Uh,
21.
or he's 21, yeah, turning 22. Um, or yeah, wait, I think I'm messing up his age. I'm not fully sure on his age. 21. But ultimately, just a fascinating player who I feel like is is kind of past his time, and I don't really see him contributing at a high level this year. But it's really congested. I think they would have to definitely let one or two of those pieces go. Bring in a DP. Yeah, you're definitely talking A range in terms of the depth. It's a lot of unproven MLS depth with Rojas and Mosquera. Again, just we haven't seen so many of these, now this golden era Red Bulls 2 team that we'll look back on maybe in the same way as the 2016 USL Cup winning Red Bulls 2 team. We haven't seen that yet. We don't know if all these guys will instantly translate to MLS level starters or guys off the bench who can really contribute. So I think for that reason, and for it being a bit more unproven, I'm gonna kind of go on the lower end of the B range. I think between Rojas and Mosquera, I feel like Mosquera showed a bit more for me. And of course Rojas class as well, but those guys in international roster spots concerns me a little bit. Sofo is someone who was kind of unfairly tasked of being a starter for 2025 and with his injury and kind of fell out of favor a little bit down the line of the season. But yeah, if the season started right now, B minus with the current state of things, but I think there's a lot more movement. Youngor and Serge Goma, I think would be like my first two to go.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the 2016 USL team before we get to our final position and wrap up for the episode. I think back to the roster moves the Red Bulls made ahead of 2017. You know, they were able to integrate so many of those important players from that 2016 team into what eventually became the 2018 Supporters Shield winners.
Mhm.
Tyler Adams, the obvious one. Then you also had Aaron Long, the other obvious one, Florian Valot. Vincent Bezecourt was a huge player off the bench for that squad. I mean, there's several other
Eric
names.
Etienne.
Derek
Yeah.
Etienne as well. Yes.
Yeah.
I think about the players that are kind of that went away. I mean, the obvious one was Dax McCarty.
Mhm.
That season was traded away kind of to make
Mhm.
room for a guy like Tyler Adams.
Mhm.
Um, you think about the following year after that, Sasha Kleshtin was given up. You know, Lloyd Sam was moved on around the same time, and this opened up a whole new avenue for these younger players to come in and succeed. And it wasn't like they completely blew up the roster. Like, of course, Luis Robles was still there. Long term, you still had Connor Lade and Kamar Lawrence and Murillo. That those players' positions, were not sacrificed. But they found a way to integrate these young players successfully, and that was also during the Jesse Marsh era, of course. So I see those similarities again, Luca, that you've kind of opened my eyes to that can continue here. Not that Daniel Ellerman has been moved on from, but it kind of feels like Peter Stroud goes to make some room for an Audrey Mehmeti,
Mhm.
or you get rid of Lewis Morgan and you bring in Cade Cowell, but you also want to integrate Andy Rojas and Rafael Mosquera, and these are players that again unproven at the MLS level have not been typically playing against fully grown men playing in
Mhm.
MLS Next Pro, but these are guys that you have to give them the platform to potentially take that next step. And it feels like this is more of a multiple years project for the Red Bulls. That's why you commit to Michael Bradley with only 6 months head coaching experience under his belt, and why you do it now.
Mhm.
So that brings us to the striker position. Is another one that down the line is there's a pretty long list as it stands. Currently, it's Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting's position. He was excellent in 2025, far and away the Red Bulls' best player on paper with as many goals as he scored. Do I think he's going to be in the market for 17, 18 goals again? Well, that depends what pieces surround him in the lineup. Because he kind of did that mostly by himself or with just Forsberg.
Mhm.
So that's exciting to see him coming back. Don't know his contract information. I believe he's got 2 more years and then an option similar to Forsberg's situation, but with an additional year. I have to double check on that as
I
well.
think actually this is his last season and then an option. So
So
yeah,
same
same
situation
as
as
Forsberg.
Forsberg.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, that makes for more. We're going to be having interesting discussions this time next year. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Choupo-Moting, behind him, you have, of course, Victor Bogots. And then I think, excitingly, a player who had kind of been written off for a while with Red Bulls 2 was Rold Mitchell, who came back from injury. And not only was he very good with Red Bulls 2, but he was a monster in that playoff run, just willing goals into the back of the net. Kind of got a similar profile to Choupo-Moting, a big, strong striker who's not afraid to use his body, but will surprise you with his technique. And I think he's going to be a player who is probably going to eclipse Bogas for that first striker off the bench position. Um, just because, like for like, he fits the bill with Choupo-Moting. Victor Bogas, a player that, again, a U22 player who hasn't hit yet, but came in injured, was highly touted, and, we'll have to wait and see on if he's able to progress. And then, of course, also there is the fellow youngster, Julian Hall, who continues to be on an upward trajectory. Not sure what his role will be in terms of how much minutes he sees. He'll start a few games here and there, will come off the bench. Um, Interested to see how much he plays in to this squad because I think Rold Mitchell might be taking away some minutes from him in that role. And we're not going to see a whole lot of two strikers set up now with the ideas moving forward 4-3-3 for the Red Bulls. Because I love what Rold Mitchell was able to do with the Red Bulls too. I'm going to lean on the optimistic side here and say B, straight up B, because after Choupo-Moting, it is a pretty big drop off. I would have
Mhm.
said around C plus B minus if, the next man on that list was Hall or Bogots. But because I have that confidence in Rold Mitchell now, I feel comfortable putting that as a B, Luca.
I'm gonna say B plus. I think Chupo is the type of guy where honestly see him I could see him putting up another double digit season. I don't know at the exact same level, He stayed surprisingly healthy. There were a few reports here and there. He picked up a little injury. He's listed as questionable, but then like he was just fully healthy the next game and played the whole game. Yeah, biggest surprise of 2025 for me was his just ability to be the leading goal scorer, the best debut season since Kenny Cooper at the striker position, which is crazy if you count Bradley Wright Phillips' debut season in 2013 where he played a few games. Um, I think I am still excited about what Victor Bogash can be. Um, Feels like not like a super pacey player, like much more of like a hold up type striker, kind of similar profile to Chupo. But then you go down the list, and I feel like Julian Hall and Rold Mitchell are the guys that we continue to be excited about. Rold Mitchell, I agree, has eclipsed uh, Victor Bogash and Julian Hall in terms of someone I would love to see just really get a nice chunk of minutes. Just so excited for him. Gets his first call up with Trinidad and Tobago,
Yes.
and his stock is just really high coming back from injury. Um, if MLS Next Pro had a comeback player of the year, I would hope that he would be in the running for that for last year, and so he's a guy where I'm more excited about him than Julian Hall. I think Julian Hall obviously has showed flashes, and his main goal in Leagues Cup where he eclipses Sergio Ramos was a fun little moment,
That was sweet.
but not too much beyond that for him in 2025. And so I think um, for me it's Chupo and Mitchell as the two main guys, but Julian I think um, could take a big leap next year. But again, there's kind of like the drop off after Chupo, like you mentioned. Another player too on the first team roster, Tanner Rosborough. We'll see if he
Yep.
contributes at all in anything in 2026. I think I do think if one of those guys gets injured, that really opens the opportunity for Tanner Rosborough to contribute. But I don't know if they're gonna go for a DP center forward. It's really probably going to be on the wing, on the right probably. And so I think if this is kind of the striker lineup we're putting out for this year, um, Chupo I think will still hit, will still be good for 10, at least 10 goals hopefully. And Rold Mitchell is someone who I think I'm like the most excited about based on the Red Bulls two guys, besides Audrey Mehmeti, of course. And so slightly more optimistic. I don't really see them moving a lot of those guys around, honestly. And I think they're gonna keep all those guys on the roster, and I think Bogosh has a big opportunity to really show us what he is made of. He didn't really do that much last year, even with Red Bulls too. And so it's a crowded position. There's a big drop off from Chupo, but ultimately kind of optimistic about Rolled hitting and then possibly Bogosh having a sneaky big season.
I mean, I see the vision for the club.
Yeah.
I certainly do. There's a whole lot of question marks. I don't think they're done constructing the squad, but just looking at the forwards, it's kind of opened up the whole vision. Whereas you have Choupo-Moting, who can be your finisher, but can also be your hold-up player. You'll have Harper and Cowell, or potentially another DP player who, they're going to provide you a lot of pace to get in behind, whereas Choupo-Moting will do well to hold up the ball. You've got Forsberg playing underneath him in the midfield, and he's going to be your facilitator. And then you have the likes of Berggren, and whether it's Mehmeti or Edelman or a new player coming in, that's a good bedrock in central midfield. And Marcelo Morales and Justin Che, if he's the right back, are players who absolutely can get forward and contribute offensively. And we'll see what it looks like next to Noah Ayla at center back. I don't think they're done there. And then the goalkeeper position, you've got a good few options to choose from. I think this is a team that can turn some heads in terms of how successful they are out of the gate with Michael Bradley. We'll wait and see when the squad is done being constructed, just exactly what that's going to look like. I think the ceiling for this team is more or less the same as what it was a season ago. Just as of now, probably around like sixth in the Eastern Conference table is probably maybe the target even for this team. But as MLS fans learned last year, the East got way stronger, and not enough teams, Red Bulls included, did enough to match it. Luca, thank you so much for coming on the show. What's been a triumphant first episode. We've nearly gone for an hour and a half. Of course, everybody can find Luca Richman and all his work at rbny.xp on Instagram, and I believe it's just rbnyxp on Twitter.
Yep. Yeah, I actually should look into changing that handle so it matches. Yeah, mainly just my Instagram. I do post on Twitter occasionally. Not not too often. Mostly kind of lurk on there for news and rumors and whatnot. But yeah, Instagram is where y'all can find me for mainly more of like a social media content creation experience, not strictly a reporting journalism experience. But yeah, no, James, thank you so much. This was great. I loved like breaking down the roster. I feel like I have a much clearer vision for next year, as I feel like the roster was kind of muddling a lot for me toward the end of the year, and I was just like, where are we going from here? But I feel like it's a lot clearer picture, a lot more moves to be made. Preseason, we don't even know the Red Bulls preseason plans yet, which will be interesting to see where they end up. They're not going to Coachella, it seems. So, but yeah, so a lot more news coming in the offseason, new kit, maybe an official rebrand announcement. So busy offseason, and we'll be hearing from Michael Bradley and Julian de Guzman next week about
Yes.
their plans so far and what they hope to continue doing in the next few weeks.
So much to look forward to in the new year for the New York Red Bulls. Will they come back to the playoffs? Will they be officially Red Bull New York? Yes, as Luca mentioned, we'll be hearing from the new manager and new head of sport on January 5th. Hopefully, we'll have an episode up shortly after that so we can break down everything and whatever news happens in the meantime. But that's going to do it for Empire Soccer Report. Thank you to Luca Richman of RBNY Experience for joining me. I've been James Burley. Happy holidays. Happy New Year to everyone listening and watching. And thank you so much for joining. We'll have so much more with Empire Soccer Report in the future. Take care.